While Israel is striking hard in Beirut, weakening Iran's proxies, Iran itself is also bracing for an attack by Israel as well, in response to the largest ballistic missile attack in history, launched in the beginning of October. Well, to talk more about how Iran is preparing, I'm joined by Norman Rule, senior advisor at United Against Nuclear Iran and former senior U.S. intelligence official. Norman, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Now, right now, Iran's proxies, they are weak, specifically the largest one being Hezbollah, but also Hamas and all of the others that continue to attack Israel on all fronts. But seeing this and how Israel's attacking these proxies, is Iran itself frightened right now?
I think Iran certainly recognizes that its proxies have been strategically defanged. However, the proxies still exist. For Iran, the best outcome would be a diplomatic ceasefire that would leave the Houthis, Hamas, and Hezbollah alive and able to be reformed, reconstituted, retrained, resupplied, and reapproached with an ideological training program by the Quds Force. As long as the Quds Force exists, Iran's regional adventurism will continue. It's just a question of the capability of those forces on the other end. And Israel has done a magnificent job in removing the strategic threat posed by these forces.
And right now, as Israel continues to vow an attack on Iran itself, how should Iran possibly be preparing for this? Earlier in the week, we unfortunately did see this U.S. intelligence breach indicating some of the preparations that Israel might be taking. But how is Iran itself preparing for whatever Israel might have in store?
Iran has few ways to really fend off an Israeli attack. The reported attack by Israel in April against Iran destroyed Iran's most sophisticated air defense system. The challenge for Israel and the good thing for Iran is that the geography is vast and it's farther away than any other Iranian proxy, with a significant air defense program that could at least complicate a Western-style attack against Iran. But to be clear, Iran has no significant capability to stop Israel from destroying multiple significant sectors of its economy. So Iran's domestic posture is going to be, we're able to contain this, we're able to survive this, we're able to push back on this. And then diplomatically, they approach the international community with both defiance, threats, as well as some sort of gesture to say, look, we're willing to stop if the Israelis will stop, in hopes that this will put pressure on Israel to contain any retaliation against Iran.
Norman, you're talking about Iran's proxies as well right now, and as we do see some U.S. leaders in the region to try and cut some sort of a deal to stop the hostilities. Is there any way that Iran itself might back away and distance itself from its proxies, even cutting a separate deal to protect its own interests and abandoning some of its proxies in the region?
There isn't a single piece of evidence that would support that theory. And again, as long as Iran's Quds Force remains alive and an element of its foreign policy, you have the organization well-staffed, well-resourced, and well-supplied with everything it needs to move once more back into the region once peace is restored.
Norman, you mentioned the impact on Iran's economy right now, which has been in shambles, truly. But what more should Iran then do to protect these national interests? And then on the flip side, what more should the international arena be doing to go after and threaten Iran, as it is in a weak place right now?
Well, of course, the primary way the international community can constrain Iran is by executing the oil sanctions that are already on the books. As long as Iran is able to export oil, it earns revenues. That revenues form its reserves. As long as it has reserves, it can fend off the impact of international sanctions. So it's critical that Iran's reserves be reduced significantly, and that can only be done if oil sanctions are seriously pursued by the West. Iran has little capacity to defend its vast energy and economic infrastructure, in part because Israel has so many potential tools: aircraft, missiles, cyber. There are a variety of tools Israel could use to strike a very, very broad series of domestic and international facing targets. Iran likely expects that Israel will not touch those targets that could impact the global energy markets, but it has multiple domestic economic and energy targets that Israel could destroy or damage with little opposition from Iran.
Very interesting. Norman Rule, thank you so much for joining us here on Middle East Now.
You're welcome.
I want to come back in studio now with Yaakov, hearing everything that is happening right now in this power play also between Israel and Iran as Israel continues to vow its response, but in the meantime going after heavy all of the Iranian proxies. Do we have any more sort of an insight into what this Israeli retaliation on Iran might look like?
We don't yet know what kind of targets are going to be hit in this attack. There have been leaks. There have been pressure campaigns from the White House, and those have actually been our only indication about what may be planned. But really, we're in the fog. And I think that there's a tension here in the decision-making sort of considerations of Israel. How far to go? Is this an opportunity to go for the nuclear sites or not? And, we're going to have to be patient and wait and see. It's clear that a strike is on the cards. I mean, that's definitely going to happen. And the big question is, will they go after the nuclear program, or will they make do with perhaps missile bases, missile factories? I think it is going to be important to hit missile sites at the very least, because that's going to affect Iran's ability to respond to that attack. As we saw with Hezbollah, when you go on the offense and you hit the enemy's strike capabilities, that automatically has an effect on what they can do in response. So that in itself is very important. But the big question, I think, is the nuke sites, to be more precise. I agree with what we just heard. The oil facilities are unlikely to be a target in the first wave, at least, because that will impact the global economy. But they may leave that as a sort of threat hanging over Iran to give the regime something to think about. If they decide to go all out in their attack, then Israel can say, if you exaggerate, quote unquote, your oil refineries, your exports, your ports, those could all be next, and that could economically destabilize that regime. So perhaps they may leave that,
leaving that as a
second wave,
over.
Right, to restrain Iran's retaliation. That's one option, but we're going to have to wait and see.
Unfortunately, that does seem to be the case. Quickly, Yaakov, I'm also just curious, by going after Hezbollah's financial abilities inside Beirut, what type of a limit does this have?
So this is actually going after the infrastructure that enabled Hezbollah to run a shadow state in Lebanon. This was not a real bank. This was an association that acted as a bank, and it was basically taking $50 million a year from Syria that the Iranians were actually selling oil to Syria, and then the money, instead of going to Iran, was going to Hezbollah. And that was one of the main sources of income for Hezbollah. And then using that money to basically fund Hezbollah's military jihad activities. And in addition, acting as a sort of financial system, shadow financial system for the Shiite community in Lebanon. So healthcare, education, all of these things that were completely independent of the Lebanese state, of the Lebanese financial system, immune to sanctions because it wasn't hooked up to SWIFT. This is going after Iran and Hezbollah's ability to run a shadow state in Lebanon.
Certainly has a lot more implications here. Yaakov Lapin, stay with us. We are going out for a quick break.